Hey there. I just wanted to quickly address a question that I think is really fundamental when you are trying to figure out how to manage employees, staff members, how to motivate them, and really kind of any humans that you deal with, colleagues, fellow attorneys, children, spouses, anybody that you are trying to work with, collaborate with, and therefore, in some cases, motivate or explain why an idea that you have is a good idea and so forth. And what I've discovered the hard way is that we keep running into trouble with people when we believe some things that aren't true, foundational things. Like, for example, we all want to believe that people are mostly rational, that they want to be rational, that all you have to do is explain to them the logic of a choice and they will adopt that choice. But a lifetime of experience, or even a short lifetime of experience, will teach you that that's not true. And if you start studying why that's not true, you can discern that this has been a problem for a long time and that people have come to grips with it. Now, there's a huge disconnect. A lot of people haven't come to grips with it. And that's why I'm doing this video, because I want to explain to you how you can motivate people better. But I think you need to understand a couple of things. Now, the first thing to understand is that people are limited in what they will accept, what they will be motivated to do, and so forth by a host of factors, the most foundational of which is things that they believe. If they believe that something is not possible, or that is undesirable, or that is against, their religious belief system or whatever, you're going to have a very hard time trying to motivate them to do something. And this is why jury consultants are hired by lawyers. And this is why, folks who go to trial all the time understand that when you pick a jury, you need to vet them for what their beliefs are, because you're not going to change that in a couple of days during a trial. So, if their beliefs are not aligned with what you need to prove, then you need to find a way to get rid of as many of those folks as possible. Or if their beliefs are aligned, then you want to keep those people, right? Because beliefs are foundational. Now, there are a lot of books that can talk about this, but one of the best books I found is this book here called Liminal Thinking by David Gray. He was a consultant. It's highly recommended by a lot of people. But in the very beginning, he talks about, principle number one, beliefs are models, and beliefs seem like the perfect representations of the world, but in fact, they are imperfect models for navigating a complex, unknowable reality. So people are guided by their beliefs. I highly recommend, this book. I think it's a great book to get and to read. It's got pictures. The guy's a really good explainer, David Gray. That's his whole thing, is he talks to corporate audiences, events, kind of like that. And he explains things in a very clear way, but he understands that he needs to start at the belief level. If you really want to dive into this, you can read this book by Robert Greene called The Laws of Human Nature, which, as you can see, is quite thick, but it also addresses this question of that human nature is the foundational piece of this puzzle, right? And so until you get a firm grasp of this, you're going to have trouble, because it's like you're going to be trying to speak a language and give people instructions, in a language they don't understand. Whereas if you speak to their beliefs, or at least, as best as possible, align their beliefs with what you need them to understand, so that they will, agree with you. They will at least be open-minded about what you are talking about. All those kinds of things. You can't just walk into a conversation or communication and assume that you can utter some words and people are going to understand them. I mean, I think you probably realize by now that's not that effective. So one of the things I wanted to share is kind of, how do I know this? And it's, partly because, one, I realized these problems, but also because my dad was a shrink. He was a psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever you want to call him. But he was deeply steeped in this whole idea of how human nature affects people's choices, their decisions, and all kinds of things like that. And so he talked to me a lot about that. My mother was also very open-minded and was interested in exploring the world. And so both of them encouraged me to be very open-minded and curious and explore things. And so I was set up to perhaps see, or start to see, and then be able to kind of come to grips with things that I guess when I look around, I see other people have trouble, coming to grips with. Like for me, I'm not wedded to fixed beliefs in the way that other people tend to be, I guess, And the background reasons for this are my mother was Panamanian, my dad was, of Swedish descent, first generation American. So you got, Swedish guy, becomes shrink. His dad was a Lutheran minister. My mother was Catholic from Panama. She spoke to me in Spanish. So I learned Spanish before I learned English. When I was 11-ish, I guess, after my mom and dad got divorced, she moved back to Panama, put me in a Panamanian high school where I had to learn the Panamanian national anthem and salute the Panamanian national flag. And, so I had to come to grips with a lot of things during my life where I just said, you know what, I see that these are beliefs. I just recognized reluctantly, frustratedly, not happily, that just because, Americans all believe something didn't mean that that was true necessarily. So I was pushed into that kind of way of thinking. So I'm more open about it. But I would say that it's the thing that has served me the best because, I don't try to change people's beliefs. I understand that that's very hard to do. And I'm very curious about how we can influence people to some extent. And I know that it's psychology. So I've read a lot of books, books like these, other books that I'm going to show you in a second. But what I'm talking to you about is distilling all of this so that you can understand it and make use of it. Now, one of the great books, like I said, is Liminal Thinking. I referenced earlier, but I want to show you something that I came across just last night, as a matter of fact, because I was watching the show Billions, and one of the episodes is called The Overton Window. And it's because the character in the show is running for political office, and he has to understand what the voters want. And so I guess, it was called The Overton Window. So I looked it up because I didn't know what that was. And I found this Wikipedia article that says the Overton window is the range of policies politically acceptable to the mainstream population at a given time. And so basically it's saying, people can only accept so much. And there's this window, which you can show them. And this is where you have to operate inside of this window. If you try to go outside that, they're not going to accept it easily. So politicians understand this. And I'm telling you, you need to understand it as well. Now, you weren't born to parents of different descent and didn't learn to speak a different language. You don't have to do any of that stuff. I really think if you read this book, that's going to basically give you the background you need to understand it. But then that book doesn't necessarily tell you how do you get people to go along with good ideas that you have. How do you get them to go along with, things that they would otherwise be closed-minded about? And that's where these books come in handy. So Instant Influence is a book by a guy named Michael Pantalone. It's one of the best books I've ever read because it's very actionable. It teaches you, he says he can teach you how to do this in 7 minutes. It takes longer than 7 minutes, but the methodology, understanding it, takes 7 minutes. Then it's a question of practicing it and training yourself to be aware in the way that you need to be aware so that you can influence people to do things. And basically the premise is that you can't get people to do things they don't want to do, right? Like that's foundational. Like if somebody doesn't want to do something, they don't believe in it, you're not going to get them to do it. But where most people fail is trying to motivate people who are actually interested in doing something. It's just that the process by which you go about trying to get them to do it or to motivate them is flawed. And it's flawed because you assume that, I'll just tell them, the good reasons and they'll do it, right? And that's not good. And also, when people hear somebody else telling them what they should do, at a very deep, visceral, primal level, they resist. They push away. This is, something that's important in marketing. It's important in negotiation. It's important to understand this in life. And that's the premise of this book, is that inside of people, you have to find that kernel, and then, like embers in a fire, you fan those embers without doing the bad things like telling them what to do or telling them what to think, but ask them a series of questions so that they are, invited to dwell upon this issue themselves in ways that causes them to reach the conclusion that, maybe they should do what you want or what makes sense, really, because you're not telling people to do things that don't make sense. You're trying to get them to do things that make sense. They have some kernel of motivation to do that. And what you need to do is not, snuff out that flame, but rather nurture it and help it grow. And this book is really good. Highly recommend it. And what's interesting about that book is it very much aligns with this book called Never Split the Difference, which is another book I highly recommend, which is about negotiation by an FBI hostage negotiator who learned how to teach people to do what he did and to use this in practical situations. And now he's a consultant, and you can go to his workshops, and he has people that he's trained to do this. And I'm sure his workshops are not expensive, but I'm sure they're worth it. And I aspire one day to go to one, because even though I've read this book a couple of times and understand what the tactics are, I think it's useful to go and be in a place for a couple of days and just, really soak up what works and what doesn't. But, one of the principles he has in the book is he says that a lot of people who teach negotiation or who think they understand negotiation, they think that what you're trying to do is get people to yes. There's even a book called Getting to Yes. And he said, actually, you have to get people to no first, because they want to say no. They don't want to go along with things that other people say. So you have to make it safe for them to say no. And this is, in fact, actually the first thing that goes on in influence, is you get people to understand that it's okay for them to say no. You start by saying, look, you can make up your own mind. You can do what you want. I'm not going to try to get you to do what I want. And you have to be sincere in conveying this, because if you're not, they'll pick up on it. But once you understand that trying to get people to say yes doesn't work, then you will, in fact, want them to understand that they have autonomy and that you respect that autonomy. And then it's just a question of what are the steps that you go through to get people to talk to you in a way that's more open-minded. And so the last book I would recommend is this book by Phil Jones. This one is really short, as you can see. And this is basically just like the exact phrases that you would use to talk to people about certain things. So it's like exactly what to say in certain situations. Mostly it's about marketing and sales, but one of the things he talks about in here, I'm looking to see if I can find it really quickly, but he says one of the phrases is, before you try to get people to do something, you would say to them, how open-minded are you about whatever the topic is, right? And the reason why that's an important question is because when you ask people that question, most people don't want to believe that they're closed-minded. Their belief system is that they are, in fact, open-minded. So they're going to want to answer that question, yes. So they're going to say that they are open-minded, right? And if they're open-minded about that, then they're going to actually be more open-minded when you talk to them about whatever you need to talk to them about, right? And so there's a process by which you talk to people in a way that helps them understand what you're trying to say, helps them find their own internal motivation. And this all takes time and patience and strategy, right? And so that's the reason why you're having trouble convincing people to do things, is that you're almost certainly going about it the wrong way, because your belief is flawed. You believe that people do things for logical reasons when that, in fact, is not, the reason why they do it. They use logic to error check decisions that they are either inclined to make or have already made. They don't, generally speaking, say, well, let me go find all the logical reasons. It takes too much effort to do that. It's not what our brains naturally do. So books like this and books like Never Split the Difference, these are great books to read and reread and underline and constantly be looking at. So there's just so many great things in this. When we do our marketing workshops, I give these away, because what you want to say on your website or in any kind of promotional materials, you need to audit that information to see if you can make it better or if there are things in there that are counterproductive. So I hope that this video has been helpful. If you have any questions, you can shoot them to me in the chat below and I'll be happy to answer them. But I think this is really important stuff. I mean, when I first discovered technology, I thought, man, technology is great. I'm just going to show all my fellow lawyers how they can be paperless and find things in an instant and automate. And they're just going to soak this up and it's going to be great. And I realized they didn't, and I didn't understand why. And it was because I didn't take stock of the fact that psychology matters more than technology. Human nature matters more than technology. So I have spent most of my time since I first discovered technology is amazing, studying psychology and human nature so that I can better help people understand and not trigger their resistance and not shoo them away. I mean, I can't change people's beliefs, so if people don't believe technology is great or whatever, if they don't like me, I can't fix that part. But what I found is that a lot of what I was doing was self-sabotaging or getting in the way of what I wanted to help people do. If you want to help people get results, it's not enough to simply say, hey, you can do this and get great results. They're not going to do it. Just think about all the things you want to do that you know you should, and you just don't do them. And in fact, actually, I'll leave you with this. One of the last chapters in this book is about how to motivate yourself, right? Because our own little internal dialogue that goes on in our head also determines what we are willing to pay attention to or not. And so if you can, talk to yourself or plan things for yourself in the right way, you will have greater success in achieving those things. All right, that's it for now. I hope you found this helpful, and I will look forward to reading your comments in the section below. All right, take care.